It is with new awareness that we turn to our speaker, Andy Stepanian. Andy Stepanian is an animal activist previously engaged in a campaign to shut down the animal testing laboratory, Huntington Life Sciences. Along with 5 other activists and an organization known together as the Shack 7, Andy Stepanian was charged and prosecuted for his animal advocacy work under a law that later became the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. He was sentenced to 26 months and jailed in a secretive prison known as a Communication Management Unit. He currently works as a publicist in New York City. It is currently an honor to share in this presentation on his experience.
Hi, my name is Brooke, and the way I go around and my activism is do desserts and food. So I'm a chef, and the most powerful thing I have to throw at people is dessert and getting them to open their minds about eating a plant-based diet. I have 2 separate questions for you all. Dara, on the way to this event today, my mind started going back and thinking about the MOVE movement. And I understand that your plight, Andy, you all did that time, but I said you all were in and out of prison, and they've been in prison since the 90s, and most people don't even remember them. They're not even a blip. So are you familiar with the fact, besides Ramona Africa got out, is it even a possibility that the male members of that group will ever be let out? That's my first question. And my second question to you, Andy, is knowing what you know now, is there anything you would change at all? And the second question is, because you're very fortunate in having to be employed now after being in prison, so do you consider yourself very fortunate even
Yes.
to be, you know, a felon and be convicted and still be able to come back and put the pieces of your life together? Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for making vegan sweets.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's really close to my heart. And I think that's a really important form of activism. And I, as a non-professional chef, do try to bring vegan food everywhere I go. And that's another form of activism. I think it's great that you do that. And as a Philadelphian, I'm familiar with the MOVE issue. And I don't know. I study animal activism and the imprisonment of animal activists and the legislation. I think each niche group has its own enemies, and so it's hard for me to apply, the template for what happens to animal activists to other activists and other people whom the government has a gripe with. So unfortunately, I can't make a prediction. It's a great question, but I don't think I can make a prediction.
To add on to that, though, for people that don't know that are in this room, on Facebook there is a Move 9 update group. Yeah, it's not a page, it's a group. I don't know what the difference really is, but if the group will periodically email people and let you know when they're up for parole hearings. So periodically there, I would say once every 60 days, there's an opportunity to phone or write polite letters to the parole board. They have since, to my knowledge, all of the Move 9 have now qualified to go up for hearings for parole. Now the onus is with the parole board as to whether or not they're going to let them out. And these things usually turn bad, especially in the state, if there's people with political interests vested around the area. So if you have a local sheriff or something like that that's like, I hate these dudes over here because they shot at, or I'm not going to say they shot at anyone, but this is what this sheriff thinks. They shot at someone 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Then they have a personal gripe and they're not going to let these individuals out. Then they're going to start lobbying, just like the NRA does, all the people that could potentially be on that board to make sure that they don't vote in that favor. And so it's our job as activists to not sleep on the fact that they're up for a parole hearing and to write that polite letter. Now, a letter from me doesn't do too much good, but a letter from, say, if some of you individuals work for a national nonprofit and you have celebrity correspondents or whoever it may be that deal with your nonprofit, maybe a celebrity, or maybe someone that's involved with government that you've been lobbying for a while, that you have a close personal relationship with. And I know that a lot of us do, because I've been in and out of legislators' offices the past year working on campaigns, and it takes nothing more than asking for a letter. So there are things you could do to help the Move 9, but it's really up to whatever it is we can do as a movement to advocate for their position.
And my other part of the question was for you. Is there anything that you, looking back,
Oh, yeah.
you know, because you may not change anything, but
Can I bob and weave around that one?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm parsing my words. But largely, in the prison industrial complex, there is a recidivism rate of 72% of all prisoners will be back within 2 years. That is for a variety of reasons. Part of them are psychological reasons. If you've been taken away from society for so long and all you've been exposed to is this, toughest guy in the schoolyard violence, you have a tendency to exhibit those traits when you come home. But the story goes deeper than that. It's, again, tied in with capitalism, the fact that a convict, when they come home, has less opportunities. Or they haven't been properly educated or programmed while incarcerated to say to them, these are the resources that you have upon release to qualify for $5,000 in insurance grant or a $58,000 bond to your employer to show that you're not going to flee. Different incentives that technically a federal prisoner or some state prisoners have with a potential employer. Things that could get them in the door with a job. They don't teach you that in prison. Pretty much what they do in prison is they throw you in the deep end and you either check in by running into protective custody or you learn how to survive with the sharks. And then you come home with this mentality like, okay, how do I survive with the sharks? Well, let's say you're a person that was released from the halfway house that I was in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, with no gainful employment. You're finally done with your term. You get released onto Myrtle Avenue. You got 4 crack spots, within a stone's throw away from the place. Barber shops that are, hubs for trafficking. Easy money there, flashy cars in front of all these barber shops, and people are like, well, I could do things the hard way or the easy way. And so for a lot of individuals, when they come home, they make the eventual easy choice, quick money. And almost always, when I heard the story for someone that came back into prison on a probation violation, it was, this was just temporary. I never wanted to go back to this lifestyle. I hate it. I hate myself for doing it. I did it for once with this guy I knew. We just moved this stuff to North Carolina and we got picked up in North Carolina. It turns out the guy you knew was someone you knew from the halfway house that already violated, that didn't want to go back. So he's like, I could get this other guy to go to North Carolina with me. And he gets 10 years knocked off his sentence. So do I feel fortunate? Yes. Racism exists in this country. Classism exists in this country. You'd be a fool to think that because we have a person of color in the White House, that racism is somehow, wiped away. If anything, things are the same as they have been in lower income neighborhoods. And the resources are the same. There's less resources provided to individuals, especially now that the economy is in poor condition. So I think of myself as very fortunate. I grew up in a middle to upper class white household. Both my parents were there. They gave me the freedom to do what I wanted to do. When I said I wanted to drop out of college to work at PETA, they were like, cool. And they let me, so that's the type of environment that I had. I always had them to fall back on. When I wanted to tour with a band and I ran out of money because I made the wrong choices while touring, I came back to their house. I mean, these are not things that make me cool because I definitely don't feel comfortable talking about them, but it's a reality. I had those privileges. And that's what, most of us take for granted as students or, middle to upper class individuals, and a lot of people call white privilege. I had it. And I spent a lot of time with people that didn't have that white privilege. Should I feel guilty for the privilege I have? No. But at the same point, should I advocate that other people have that ability to have that privilege and to even out this playing field somewhat? Yeah. It also was to my benefit that I had such great people like in this room advocating for myself, not only myself, but all my co-defendants while in prison. The only reason why I was hired at that publishing company was because someone by the name of Will Potter wrote an article in a magazine called Herbivore, and Josh Hooten designed a cover at the publishing house I happened to work for. And Josh Hooten stayed in touch and sent Why Vegan packets to the CEO of the company who happened to go vegan. And he had a lot of white guilt and was like, I'm going to do something, be charitable. And he called the prison and was like, if you release him to a work release program, he can come work for me. And I was like, what's the catch? And there was no catch, and I'm still there. So my case is a rare situation. By no means am I going to say I'm your standard prisoner. And if I have an opportunity to talk about it to the prisoners, the reality is these resources are not there for you. There is no support structure. There might not even be a family there waiting for you. You may have gone to jail with a partner, and that partner had since left you because the time was too long. You may have gone to jail with children or children in the womb. You come home, they don't want to talk to you because you've been gone for so long. And that does something to someone. That furthers that psychological paradigm of repeating yourself and falling into recidivism. I'm sorry for going off on too much of that. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, no, you did.
I think you were first.
So the ADA, in a way, it's a very narrow law in terms of who it targets. It targets a viewpoint, like you said. But it also seems really broad in terms of what it can be applied to and how you can be caught. Do you see any appeals working? I mean, given the language of the law, it seems like it's crafted to avoid successful appeal. But I'm curious as to what you think is the best strategy for appealing in the future.
Okay. Most recently, it was discussed by a court in a district court in California with the, have you heard of the ADA 4? A new group of activists who were prosecuted under the ADA. And when the court was talking about, when the court examined viewpoint discrimination, because of course the defendants, the activist lawyers, argued that the law was not constitutional. So they challenged the constitutionality of the ADA, which is just the dream for every lawyer who just can't stand this law. But the court knocked down the argument, and it was such a clever way of saying it. It basically said that the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act does not target animal rights activists. It targets anybody who would have an issue with the animal enterprise. So, if you were a vivisector yourself, but you had an issue with what you were being paid and you wanted to protest the animal enterprise and you stood outside or you caused damage, you too could be prosecuted. Even though you're not an animal rights activist, because you interfered with the animal enterprise, you too could be prosecuted. Therefore, the statute applies equally to everybody. Everybody and anybody, regardless of your position and your viewpoint. I think a lot of us think that that is actually the silliest thing we've ever heard, but that was the court's discussion and conclusion as to why the statute was constitutional. With that on the books, I'm not sure about successful appeals. I'm not sure what angle can be taken except to say that's the most asinine thing I ever heard. Can we get a justice who's not smoking crack to review this? I mean, I really don't know, but that's actually quite recent. That was in October of 2009 that the court reviewed the constitutionality of the ADA. It was a district court in California. I believe it's a panel.
My case involving my co-defendants and I is under appeal right now, and all that I could say is that the framework of the law itself is overbroad and is designed that way for a reason. It kind of gives them a legal outlet to say that like they didn't know better, or if they lost the case, that it could still apply to somebody else. The sad part of my appeal is that if we win, which there's a good chance that we will, if we win, it's not going to be heavily applicable to people charged underneath the new law. I know a lot of people think that if we have our day in court and we win, that it's somehow case law that's going to be this landmark case that therefore will set the standard for everybody else. It's not, because the new law has new codification, and the same type of appeal is going to happen to the new law in order to fight it effectively. So I know there's a lot of rhetoric in activist groups that if we win, then the other individuals will be all right. The truth is they need to fight it too. The guy in the blue shirt in the back was first.
Yeah, for those of us interested in animal rights law, are there jobs, and how do I get one?
Do you want to be paid for what you do? way, if you don't want to be paid, there's plenty you can do. There's so many grassroots groups that need your help. In fact, I'm a board member of this group called 4 Feet Forward, and we provide pro bono legal and graphic and media services to grassroots animal advocacy organizations. So we need help all the time. Animal law is defined in so many different ways. You could go the policy route and the lobbying route if you're okay with cage-free legislation and that kind of thing. Humane Society might hire you. PETA has a really strong legal department. There are some huge groups that will pay you, and they might pay you nicely to do some animal law for them. They're very competitive jobs. I think the best route for anyone starting out is to get involved with pro bono work. There's so many, like I said, so many grassroots animal advocacy groups that don't have the money to pay, but they really need a good, smart mind of someone who cares. Sorry.
And by the way, just from an entrepreneurial standpoint, just because there's no jobs and no money doesn't mean don't do it. You just have to hustle.
I didn't mean to say don't do it.
Definitely do it, because we need more lawyers.
Wow, I've never heard that before, by the way. We need more lawyers. Thank you for saying that. I never hear that.
In the movement, I don't know
okay.
about in general, but.
What was the length of your sentence?
I was sentenced to 36 months in prison, 1 year supervised release, and $1,001 of restitution. The $1 was so I can get the 3 years. That's actually how the law works. The sentencing guidelines are set based on how much money in damages you cost. So if the judge made it $750,000, I couldn't do more than 24 months in prison, and the government was like, nah, make it $1 million. So they made it $1,001 just to cross that border so they can go and give me an extra year. So they gave me an extra year. I think he was next.
So if you win your case, does HLS get to pay you a big lump sum?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I don't know if HLS got any of their money yet. It's going to a third party, and then the third party cuts their checks. But right now it's at like, I think $7,800. I'd be stoked on that. Yeah, like maybe, yeah, $8,200, $7,800, something like that. Yeah. Okay, back to you, I guess.
Why did you go to the offices of Deloitte and Touche? What was that about?
Well, being that my case is still under appeal,
I think
and I regret talking about it as much as I already did.
Just a quick one. If, say, in the worst case scenario, you don't win your appeal, does that mean, like, for eternity until you somehow amassed $1,001, you're going to be responsible for, like, taking out of your children's college fund and grandchildren's college fund to pay them back?
So getting indicted underneath the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, you're more likely to get into a car accident. A lot of folks get into car accidents. You're more likely to get into one of those, and I'd be more worried about that, and I would definitely wear your seatbelt, so folks, wear your seatbelt. But I have to pay for the next 20 years at least. I have not signed the contract. They have been trying to repeatedly serve me. These process servers try to serve me.
Don't say anymore.
No, it's okay. I don't mind talking about this. I'm pretty frank with my probation officers about it. My lawyer advises me not to sign it because, like things being overbroad, it kind of waives my right to appeal on restitution issues. So why would I sign a larger document unless they tailor it to be strictly about restitution? I've made all my restitution payments that they've asked of me, and I've been over by 2.5% on each one in case they try to say there's any variance in my income, just so that way they can't say that I pocketed any money on the side. Because the truth is, if it's an extra $60 a month versus them throwing me back in jail on some BS, I'd rather give them $60 a month and be out here talking to you guys. So I'm forced to do it until May 5th. On May 4th or 5th, something's going to happen in the way of civil litigation. I don't know what that is, so something will happen to me on the 4th or 5th. Either the process servers will come back, or they'll try to extend my probation, or they'll do something. But right now, they don't have reason to violate me because I've given them 2.5% more than they're asking for every single time they try to take it from me.
Was the newly elected Republican governor of New Jersey one of the main prosecutors in the case, Chris Christie?
He was the lead counsel, yes. And you know what the sad part is? I actually work as a publicist for a publishing company, but I also work as a publicist for the Surfrider Foundation. So I've gotten to kick it with him since I got out, and that's been really awkward. Because you're the dude that threw me in jail.
Stay
away from the jersey.
Do you think it's possible to negotiate the sort of difference between folks who are attacking HLS, attacking in a sort of metaphoric sense? I don't think anyone would ever, folks who are attacking HLS as like one manifestation of capitalism that's like particularly horrible but altogether typical. And those folks who are kind of interested in feeding people vegan desserts, talking about animal rights law, and talking about like sort of very liberal, specific pseudo solutions to the issues of like animal cruelty, in quotation marks, only because it's much worse than that.
That's a really good question, because I think a lot of people talked about that for a while. Most activist groups want to build bridges. That's what you want to do when you're in an activist group. But if you're involved with a campaign that's specific like that, don't try to alienate yourself from others, but there may be legitimate reasons why you don't want to click up with the vegan food squad, because you don't want them to get roped in with what you're doing if what you're doing could potentially get you in trouble. So I usually come from, I sometimes feel like maybe it's good to keep certain groups separate and allow them to work in their autonomy. Like, for example, there are groups that have staunch opinions, radical opinions that may disagree with HSUS. I kind of fall under this banner of, well, I'm labeled as super radical, but I love HSUS. I'm stoked on the fact that they help so many animals and that they are able to bring this message to such a wide audience that I was never able to do. So I'm excited for them. I'm excited for any of these groups that are doing lobbying efforts or making vegan dessert. What she's doing is great, and she should be applauded for it.
And she
that's
should
amazing.
bring us food next time, I'm just saying.
free desserts. But yeah, I think that we should all support each other morally, but there are reasons to sometimes create severance, especially if you're up against government repression.
I have a question. I was just wondering, as an attorney, and it sounds like you also view yourself as an activist as well, do you draw a distinction between, especially in the context of the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Law Act, do you draw any distinction between those who are going into research labs and farms and liberating the animals versus those who are firebombing or attempting to firebomb the homes of the individuals that they're targeting? And sometimes I understand, I remember the video said that nobody's been hurt yet, but the sort of move towards, or the possibility that someone may be hurt as a result of the more radical acts that have been taking place.
Do I draw a distinction? If somebody gets hurt, and by somebody, I mean human or non-human, I'll have a problem with the action. It would be harder for me to defend. But so far it's property damage and it's economic damage, and I don't feel bad about the damaging of property and economic or financial income when those people are funding the torture of animals and the use of animals and the exploitation of animals. It's property damage. I don't think it's violent, but bombing a building where somebody is in there and somebody could get hurt is violent. So I sort of draw the line at violence. As a vegan, I really believe in peacefulness towards all creatures, humans and non-humans. So I draw the line at violence as far as the distinction. Under the law, as you've seen, plenty of non-violent acts can be considered terrorism. But if you're asking me my personal opinion, I draw the line at violence as to where the distinction is, what's acceptable. But again, the statute is a completely different picture.
You talked about property damage and loss of profits, and I was wondering if you could go further into loss of profits and how property damage in the law became loss of profits and how that applies to everybody today, or how that would still apply today.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, an example would be any mechanism of animal research. So where you take papers or you take records. And the reason why is because it makes the company have to do the test again. So to repeat an experiment, it costs money. So property is very much linked into economic damage. And it's quite easy, except in, I guess, the shack case, for them to rack up the dollars that they lose by having to repeat an experiment or having to buy more pens or repair the locks on the cages. So I think there's a really direct link, and it's calculated quite easily the second you cause any kind of damage.
I think the legalese as it was written in the law that they used to prosecute me was, it was designed for people that raid fur farms, let the animals go, and damage property. And one of the tactics was to destroy breeding cards. The breeding cards, I guess, chart the breeding flow of species of mink to decide whether or not there's going to be albino or whatever colors of the animal. So they created the law to focus on these breeding cards, saying that by destroying a breeding card, you're creating future work and future damage, like Dara was talking about. The way that it was used against me was that instead of breeding cards, they were talking about intellectual losses. So they were talking about theoretical losses on a stock market in a similar sense. And that's where it got a little bit more vague. But that is how technically monetary damage can apply to these prosecutions. Again, it's not going to happen to everybody, though. And they really just pick or choose who they do it to.